Let me tell you something strange about kindness in the modern world. We live in a culture that celebrates selflessness. We applaud the ones who always say yes, who never complain, who put everyone else first. Yet some people take this so far that they disappear completely. They smile when they're hurting. They agree when they disagree. They give until there's nothing left. You might even know someone like that. Maybe you are someone like that. And here's the question that lingers beneath every forced smile. Why? Why would someone sacrifice their own needs so completely that they become invisible to themselves? It's easy to assume that people pleasers are just naturally generous or kind-hearted, but that's not the full picture. Beneath the surface, there's an entire psychology at play, one that speaks volumes about childhood wounds, distorted self-worth, and the exhausting performance of being acceptable to everyone except yourself. See, for some people, saying yes is not generosity, it's survival. It's a defense mechanism learned so early that it feels like personality. Because whether we admit it or not, most people pleasers didn't choose this pattern. They were conditioned into it. Maybe by parents who only showed love when they behaved perfectly. Maybe by environments where conflict meant danger. Maybe by experiences that taught them a devastating lesson. Your worth is measured by how much you give, not by who you are. And yet, those who constantly accommodate others are often the ones suffering most silently. They listen without being heard. They support without being supported. They care without feeling cared for. Psychologists have found something heartbreaking. People who chronically people please often score higher on traits like anxiety, emotional exhaustion, and suppressed anger. They tend to struggle with boundary setting, self-advocacy, and knowing what they actually want. In other words, they aren't trying to be good, they're trying to be safe. And in a world that takes advantage of niceness, that's dangerous. Because let's be honest, most people-pleasing is not just kindness, it's fear. It's an unconscious transaction. If I make you happy, you won't reject me. Every favor, every apology, every time you shrink yourself says, please don't leave. Please don't hurt me. Please tell me I'm enough. But when you build your identity on other people's approval, something shifts. You stop knowing who you are. You start living in reaction instead of intention. You become a mirror reflecting what everyone else needs while your own reflection fades. And that's the secret psychology behind people pleasers. They're terrified of conflict because conflict once meant danger. They don't hate boundaries. They just never learned they were allowed to have them. It's not about being weak or passive. It's about a nervous system trained to prioritize everyone else's comfort over your own survival. Because when you've learned that love is conditional, you start believing you have to earn the right to exist. For some, people-pleasing starts after a kind of emotional abandonment. Maybe they once expressed their needs until one day they were punished for it, told they were selfish, too much, too sensitive. They realized that every time they asked for something, they felt an invisible rejection. They weren't being loved anymore. They were being tolerated. So they adapted quietly. No protest, just a slow disappearance of self from their own life. But here's what's often misunderstood. People-pleasing doesn't mean not having needs. It doesn't mean they don't feel resentment. It often means they feel too much, care too deeply, and are terrified that showing their true self will cost them everything. There's a concept in psychology called fawning. It's the fourth trauma response beyond fight, flight, or freeze. It's the instinct to appease, to become what others need, to dissolve your boundaries in order to survive. And people pleasers live in perpetual fawn mode. They keep their authentic selves hidden, not because they don't have one, but because showing it once felt too dangerous. So people who constantly please others are often protecting themselves from a pain they've already experienced. The pain of being rejected for being real. And maybe that's not weakness or doormat behavior. Maybe it's a scar dressed up as personality. Because think about it. When was the last time you said yes when you meant no? When was the last time you smiled through discomfort, agreed to something that drained you, or apologized for something that wasn't your fault? That reflex, that need to keep the peace at your own expense is not natural. It's conditioned. It's the product of experiences that taught you your feelings don't matter as much as other people's comfort. And when someone operates from that belief, it doesn't feel like sacrifice. It feels like obligation. But not everyone who people pleases is doing it consciously. Some are driven by a deep, unspoken fear. The fear of being too much, too needy, too real. Psychologists call this core shame, the belief that you are fundamentally flawed and unworthy of love. And for many people pleasers, that shame runs so deep it becomes their operating system. They worry that if they stop performing, if they stop being helpful, useful, agreeable, they'll be abandoned. So they stay hypervigilant, constantly reading the room, adjusting their personality, sacrificing their truth. Not because they don't want boundaries, but because the cost of having them feels like annihilation. They want to be loved, but only conditionally, because unconditional love feels impossible. And ironically, sometimes the most accommodating people are the loneliest. They're surrounded by people, yet completely unseen. They're not absent, they're erased. They just learned that existing loudly costs too much. There's a deep psychological undertone to that accommodation. In a world that constantly says, be yourself, choosing to be everyone else becomes a form of self-protection. It's saying, I'll disappear so you don't have to reject me. They might nod through conversations, smile through pain, agree through frustration, but they rarely assert because they understand something most don't. Not every version of you is safe to show. Sometimes the most vulnerable thing you can do, having a need, setting a limit, saying no, feels like inviting rejection. And when you've been rejected enough, you start protecting yourself by becoming invisible. This is where the paradox lies. People pleasers are often incredibly perceptive. They can read emotions, anticipate needs, sense tension before anyone else. Yet they use all that awareness not to protect themselves, but to protect others from discomfort. They become emotional caretakers, managing everyone's feelings while their own go unprocessed. That kind of hypervigilance is exhausting. It leaves you drained, resentful, and wondering why you can never do enough. And the people who people please, they live in that exhaustion. They build relationships based on utility, not authenticity. They offer everything while asking for nothing. And they wonder why they feel so empty. Part of this is also about identity confusion. When your entire sense of self is built on what others need, you lose touch with what you want. You stop knowing your preferences, your boundaries, your values. You become a version of yourself designed for approval. And the real you, the one with opinions, desires, dislikes, gets buried so deep you forget it exists. That's not selflessness. It's self-abandonment. And ironically, the same people who can't say no often have the most to offer. But they give it away so freely that it loses value, even to themselves. Because real connection isn't about one person endlessly accommodating. It's about mutual respect, honesty, and the courage to show up as you are, flaws and all. These are the people who carry everyone's burdens but never share their own. They process everyone's emotions but suppress their own. They understand deeply what it means to be hurt, yet continue prioritizing others who may never return the care. They don't need the world to fix them. They just need permission to stop fixing everyone else. And maybe, just maybe, in a world so obsessed with taking, their exhaustion isn't a personality flaw. It's a warning, a reminder that you cannot pour from an empty cup, and that sometimes the most rebellious thing you can do is choose yourself. You know what's fascinating? The longer someone stays trapped in people-pleasing, the more disconnected they become from their authentic self. Anger feels forbidden, boundaries feel selfish, rest feels unearned. It's as if they've internalized a belief that their value depends entirely on their usefulness. Because when you spend your life managing other people's emotions, you stop having access to your own. There's a quiet tragedy in being the person everyone relies on but no one truly knows. You're the listener who's never heard, the supporter who's never supported, the giver who's never allowed to receive. And that's something people-pleasing rarely lets you escape. But the psychology behind this goes deeper than habit or personality. It's rooted in attachment. Psychologists have identified that many chronic people-pleasers developed anxious or disorganized attachment styles in childhood. Maybe their caregivers were inconsistent, offering love one moment and withdrawal the next. So they learned to read cues obsessively, to anticipate needs, to become whatever kept the connection stable. Now imagine carrying that pattern into adulthood. Every relationship becomes a test, every interaction a performance. You're not connecting, you're auditioning, and that's exhausting. People who people please often have what's called an external locus of control, meaning their sense of safety and worth comes from outside themselves. They need constant reassurance that they're doing enough, being enough, giving enough. But here's the trap. No amount of external validation can fill an internal void. And here's what's even more interesting. Studies show that people pleasers often struggle with something called differentiation, the ability to maintain a sense of self while in relationship with others. They lose themselves in others' needs, absorbing emotions, taking responsibility for things that aren't theirs to carry. And over time, this leads to burnout, resentment, and a quiet, simmering rage they can never express because anger feels too dangerous. And maybe that's the real prison, to be angry at everyone while blaming only yourself. But people-pleasing doesn't always come from fear. Sometimes it comes from love. A genuine, deep desire to help, to ease suffering, to make things better. The problem is when that love has no boundaries. When you give so much that you hollow yourself out. When you become so focused on others that you forget you matter too. There's a subtle betrayal that happens when you constantly prioritize everyone else. You abandon yourself. You teach people that your needs don't matter, and eventually you start believing it. You stop speaking up when something bothers you. You stop asking for help when you're drowning. You smile through exhaustion and call it strength. But real strength isn't endless accommodation. It's knowing when to say, I can't, I won't, not this time. That's one of the hardest lessons for people pleasers, that no is a complete sentence. That you don't owe anyone an explanation for protecting your peace. That disappointing someone is not the same as failing them. Some of the most painful moments in a people pleaser's life happen when they finally try to set a boundary and face backlash. The people who benefited from their compliance suddenly call them selfish. The relationships built on their endless giving crumble when they ask for reciprocity. And that confirms their worst fear. See, I'm only loved when I'm useful. But here's the truth. Those weren't real relationships. They were transactions. And when you stop playing a role, you find out who actually sees you. When psychologists talk about healthy relationships, they talk about interdependence, the balance between autonomy and connection. But people pleasers often live in codependence, where their identity is so tangled with others' needs that separation feels like death. They don't know where they end and others begin. So when someone is upset, they feel responsible. When someone is angry, they feel guilty. When someone struggles, they feel obligated to fix it, even at their own expense. So when a people pleaser finally chooses themselves, it's not selfishness, it's survival. It's reclaiming the parts of themselves they gave away, trying to be enough for everyone else. They don't need to be applauded for setting boundaries. They need to survive the guilt that comes with it. And here's the paradox. The people who give the most often receive the least. Not because people are malicious, but because they've trained everyone to expect it. They've made themselves so available, so accommodating, that others assume they don't have needs. They're taken for granted not because they're worthless, but because they've made their own needs invisible. They are present for everyone except themselves. And presence, true self-honoring presence, is what they've been denying themselves all along. But sometimes, that very selflessness becomes a prison. People might admire their kindness, rely on their support, take comfort in their stability. Yet if you look closer, their generosity isn't freedom, it's compulsion. It's the frantic need to be needed because being wanted feels impossible. There's a quiet desperation that comes from feeling like you must earn love through service. That some parts of you, your anger, your needs, your limits, are too much for others to handle. And maybe some moments are too honest for that. So the next time you see someone who can never say no, don't assume they're just nice. Maybe they're terrified. Maybe they learned that their worth is conditional. Maybe they're exhausted from carrying everyone while collapsing inside. Maybe they're the ones who forgot what the rest of us take for granted, that you don't have to earn the right to exist. That being too much for the wrong people just means you're enough for the right ones. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop betraying yourself for the comfort of others. Because in the end, we're not meant to be endless givers. We're meant to be whole people. And people pleasers, when they finally choose themselves, remind us of something beautiful. That the most radical act of self-love is refusing to abandon yourself for anyone. Even when it costs you everything you thought kept you safe. So, if you recognize yourself in these words, hear this. Your needs matter. Your boundaries are sacred. Your anger is valid. And the people who love the real you, limits and all, those are your people. The rest were only ever loving a version of you that was slowly killing the real one. It's time to stop performing worthiness and start embodying it. Not by doing more, but by being more of who you actually are. Messy, imperfect, boundaried, and finally, beautifully free. And if this resonated with you, if you've spent years putting everyone else first while losing yourself in the process, I want you to do something radical. Choose yourself today. Set one boundary. Say one honest no. Feel the discomfort and do it anyway. Because your liberation starts the moment you stop sacrificing your truth for someone else's comfort. Drop a comment below and tell me, what's one boundary you're ready to set? Let's build a community of people who are done people-pleasing and ready to start self-honoring. And if you want more psychology content that helps you understand yourself and break free from these patterns, subscribe and hit that notification bell. Because we're just getting started on this journey toward authentic living. Your healing matters, your voice matters, and you, exactly as you are, matter. Not because of what you do for others, but because you exist. Remember that, and I'll see you in the next one.